Hello and welcome to our morning edition of Arirang News. We begin with these stories making the headlines at this hour. The United States and Iran have agreed to a 2-week ceasefire. U.S. President Donald Trump said he'll suspend attacks against Iran for 2 weeks, subject to Iran agreeing to open the Strait of Hormuz. Iran's Supreme National Security Council also said it has accepted the temporary ceasefire, saying it would negotiate with the U.S. in Islamabad starting Friday. Public parking lots in South Korea will operate on a 5-day rotation system starting today, where drivers can only park on designated days based on the last digit of their license plates. Public sector workers' vehicles will also face tightened driving regulations under a 2-day rotation. South Korea's presidential chief of staff has begun his trip to visit 3 major energy producers, Kazakhstan, Oman, and Saudi Arabia, as part of the country's efforts to secure additional oil supplies. The United States and Iran have reached a ceasefire agreement, which key mediator Pakistan says is effective immediately. The agreement follows days of escalating tensions and sharp exchanges. For more on this, we have our correspondent Kim Yo-jong on the line for us. Jun-ong, tell us more.
The United States and Iran reached a ceasefire deal on Tuesday evening, hours after U.S. President Donald Trump threatened to wipe out Iran's entire civilization unless it allowed safe passage for commercial shipping through the Strait of Hormuz. Taken to Truth Social just around 90 minutes before an 8 p.m. deadline, after which he said the U.S. would destroy Iranian bridges and energy infrastructure. Trump said that the agreement was, quote, subject to the Islamic Republic of Iran agreeing to the complete, immediate, and safe opening of the Strait of Hormuz. Iran was quick to respond to Trump's ceasefire announcement, with the country's foreign minister Abbas Araghchi saying that Iran would cease their defensive operation and that for a period of 2 weeks, safe passage through the Strait of Hormuz will be possible. According to the New York Times, Iran's National Security Council said Washington had accepted all 10 points of its proposed peace terms. The terms include Iran's control over shipping in the Strait of Hormuz, the withdrawal of U.S. combat troops from bases across the region, the easing of sanctions, and compensation for war damages. Pakistan's Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif, who was acting as a mediator between the U.S. and Iran, welcomed the agreement in a statement, adding that the ceasefire is effective immediately. He also invited both countries to Pakistan's capital Islamabad on Friday for peace talks. Pakistan had previously urged Trump to extend the deadline by 2 weeks to give diplomacy more time. Meanwhile, U.S. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth is set to hold a press conference at the Pentagon on Wednesday morning local time. That was the latest. Back to you, Unji.
All right, Juno, thank you for the update. Do keep us posted. And now for a closer look at the situation in the Middle East, we're joined today by Professor Hassan Khan, visiting professor at Hankuk University of Foreign Studies. Professor Khan, thanks for coming on today.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
So, U.S. President Donald Trump has agreed to pull back on threats against Iran for 2 weeks if the Strait of Hormuz is opened. After Pakistan pushed for a temporary ceasefire, so he's been setting a series of deadlines only to pull back at the last minute. What do you make of these latest developments?
Actually, what we are seeing here is a classical pattern of coercive bargaining. Trump has repeatedly used maximalist threats and short deadlines and then stepped back at the last moment. So this is to preserve room for negotiations. So in that sense, the latest pause does not necessarily show that weakness in Trump's side. It shows that he is just trying to combine diplomacy with pressure. So at the same time, this approach has some costs because when a leader repeatedly issues ultimatums and then revises them, allies as well as adversaries may misinterpret this as the deadlines are not fixed, but rather negotiable. So that can reduce deterrence credibility while keeping diplomacy alive. So I think my assessment is that this is not a peace breakthrough yet. It is a tactical de-escalation centered by mutual exhaustion, energy market pressure, and third-party mediation, especially Pakistan. So Trump's latest move suggests that Washington will still use leverage and not all-out escalation. The 2 weeks window should be understood as bargaining interval, not as an evidence that the core dispute has been totally settled.
I see. And Iran has also agreed to this 2-week ceasefire in the war, and it said it would negotiate with the United States in Pakistan starting Friday. So what does this tell us about Iran's strategy going forward?
Well, Iran's acceptance of a 2-week ceasefire and its agreement to start talk with the United States in Islamabad, this shows that Tehran is pursuing a strategy of what we call controlled de-escalation without political surrender. So Iranian officials have made it clear that the ceasefire is tactical, not final. In fact, Iran's National Security Council said explicitly that this does not signify the end of the war, and warned that it remained ready to retaliate if strikes renewed against Iran. What this tells us is that Iran appears to be trying to do three things at once. So one is it wants to reduce immediate military pressure and avoid further damage at this moment to the country. Second, it wants to shift battlefield into diplomatic arena, where it may be able to extract concessions from the United States. Concessions like sanctions or security guarantees or maritime arrangements. Third is it wants to preserve its image of resistance by presenting the ceasefire not as a concession but as a pause entered from a position of endurance, not endurance and continued deterrence from Iran's side.
I see. So de-escalation without surrender. And there are also reports that Iran's new supreme leader, Mojtaba Khamenei, is in critical condition after the same strike that killed his father on February 28th and may be unable to take part in decision-making. So if that's true, how might this affect the course of this war?
Well, we have to be careful about these reports because the claim that is not firmly verified that Mojtaba Khamenei has not appeared publicly, and that there are widespread rumors that he may have been wounded. Iranian officials, meanwhile, have publicly denied that he is incapacitated. If the reports are true, however, the likely effect would be a shift from personalized leadership toward more fragmented or more security-driven decision-making, especially by the Revolutionary Guard and other hardline institutions. In such a situation, wars can become more dangerous because fewer actors have the political authority to compromise, and the military organizations often gain greater influence over escalation decisions. So the main implication would not necessarily be immediate collapse of Iran. Rather, it could produce a command and control problem, slower political decision-making, less coherent signaling to foreign mediators, and greater risk that battlefield logic overtake diplomatic logic. So if the leadership is truly incapacitated, that could make the war harder to end, even if both sides say they want negotiations.
I see. And Professor Gunn, before I let you go, President Trump has been criticizing Pacific allies, including South Korea, for not doing enough in this war. How should countries like South Korea respond at this point?
South Korea should respond with strategic restraint and I say not again, not rhetorical defensiveness. So Seoul interests are real, but specific. It's like energy security, maritime trade, protection of Korean shipping, and prevention of a wider regional war. It should support de-escalation and protect the sea lane through diplomatic and logistical cooperation and strengthen emergency energy procurement, but avoid pulled into open-ended military commitment that exceeds its core interest. In fact, Seoul actually is moving in that direction very well. The South Korean government has dispatched a special envoy to Kazakhstan, Oman, and Saudi Arabia to secure energy supplies. And it has lined up alternative crude and key industrial input because more than 60% of its crude oil and more than half of its naphtha imports usually transit in Hormuz. So that is a rational response for trade-dependent state facing an energy shock. South Korea should frame its policy around burden sharing without entrapment in this war. For middle powers like South Korea, the best response is not to mirror Washington's rhetoric, but to contribute where they are strongest, like logistics, diplomacy, sanctions, coordination, shipping control, shipping protection, and supply chain resilience.
I see. All right, Professor Khan, thanks so much for taking the time today. We appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. Thank you.
Here in South Korea, the country is rolling out a 5-day rotational parking system starting today across public lots. At the same time, stricter vehicle rotation rules are taking effect nationwide amid rising fuel costs stemming from the Middle East conflict. Our Lee Seung-jae has more.
Seoul is introducing new parking restrictions as part of emergency energy-saving measures. Starting Wednesday, the city begins its 5-day rotational parking system across more than half of its public parking lots. Under the rule, drivers can only park on designated days based on the last digit of their license plate. Vehicles ending in 1 or 6 will be restricted on Mondays, 2 or 7 on Tuesdays, 3 or 8 on Wednesdays, 4 or 9 on Thursdays, and 5 or 0 on Fridays. The system will not apply on weekends or public holidays. The measure follows the government's decision to raise the National Oil Resource Security Alert to warning, prompting a series of nationwide emergency steps. Hybrid cars are also included, although hydrogen-powered vehicles are exempt. Additional exemptions apply to vehicles carrying people with disabilities, national merit recipients, pregnant women, those with kids attending preschool, as well as emergency and special purpose vehicles. Out of 124 public parking lots in Seoul, 75 will implement the system. The remaining locations are excluded due to local regulations or their proximity to traditional markets and residential areas. At the same time, stricter vehicle rotation rules are being introduced across the public sector. A nationwide odd-even system will apply to government employees and official vehicles, allowing operation only on matching calendar days. The policy affects around 11,000 public institutions, including government offices, regional authorities, and public schools. With fuel prices rising and tighter driving restrictions in place, more people are expected to turn to public transportation.
I could manage driving when gas was around 1,801, but now it's over 2,000. I think I should start taking the subway.
Companies are also considering applying stricter driving policies, as Samsung is also beginning its voluntary 5-day rotational system for its employees on Wednesday. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
South Korea's President Lee has sent his chief of staff as a special envoy to Kazakhstan, Oman, and Saudi Arabia in a diplomatic push to secure additional oil and naphtha supplies. Our Blue House correspondent Song Yu-jin reports.
Presidential Chief of Staff Kang Won-sik has begun his trip to 3 major energy producers as President Lee Jae-myung's special envoy for strategic economic cooperation.
As special envoy for strategic economic cooperation, I will be visiting Kazakhstan, Oman, and Saudi Arabia starting Tuesday evening, together with officials from relevant ministries and domestic energy firms, for further talks on securing additional supplies of crude oil and naphtha.
Speaking to reporters ahead of his departure on Tuesday, Kang said the mission is to prepare for what the Blue House now sees as a longer period of energy instability. He says the risk of disruption is not imminent, as South Korea has already secured crude oil volumes equivalent to 59% of last April's imports and 69% of May's. But the problem is that South Korea remains heavily dependent on shipments that pass through the now virtually closed Strait of Hormuz.
Last year, 61% of our crude oil imports and 54% of naphtha imports passed through the Strait of Hormuz. Given the structure of our economy, we urgently need measures to secure alternative supply lines until the situation in the Middle East is fully resolved.
Even if more reaches the market, prices remain significantly higher than before the war. Kang acknowledged that a quick end to the conflict would still be unlikely to bring energy prices down right away. He added that the government's supplementary budget bill, currently under review at the National Assembly, includes subsidies for crude oil and naphtha suppliers to prevent even higher costs being passed on to consumers. For now, however, the top priority is boosting physical supply. Eyes are on what tangible outcomes Kang's trip will deliver this time, as his visit to the UAE last month led to a deal to import 24 million barrels of crude oil. 송유진, Arirang News.
North Korea has fired at least one unidentified projectile toward the East Sea. This is according to South Korea's Joint Chiefs of Staff, though no further details have yet been given. The launch this morning came just a day after North Korea fired an unidentified projectile from the Pyongyang area on Tuesday, which reportedly shows signs of abnormality shortly after launch. And North Korea is pushing back against Seoul's optimistic reading of recent remarks by Kim Yo-jong. A senior North Korean official says her statement was not a gesture of goodwill, but a clear warning. This comes after President Lee Jae-myung expressed regret over drone incursions into the north. Following that, Kim Yo-jong described President Lee as frank and broad-minded. However, North Korea's first Vice Foreign Minister Chang Kim-cheol dismissed South Korea's interpretation as wishful thinking, saying the message instead calls on Seoul to acknowledge wrongdoing and avoid further engagement. He also stressed that North Korea still considers the South its most hostile state, pointing to Seoul's support for UN resolutions on human rights. And back here in Seoul, President Lee Jae-myung hosted the leaders of South Korea's two main political parties on Wednesday, calling for unity at a difficult time. Our Yoon Jung-min reports.
The three-way meeting began with handshakes. President Lee Jae-myung, wearing a tie representing unity, called for across-the-aisle cooperation as he hosted the leaders of the nation's two main political parties over lunch, stressing the importance of communication.
우리 공동체가 위기에 처해 있을 때는 내부적 단합이 정말로 중요합니다. 우리가 통상적으로 얘기하는 것처럼 통합이라고 하는 것이 정말 이럴 때 빛을 발하지 않을까 싶습니다.
Higher living costs topped Tuesday's meeting as the country navigates the fallout from the war in the Middle East. Lee said he expects dialogue and coordination across the aisle for the war response supplementary budget worth 26 trillion won or $17 billion, which includes cash assistance for the bottom 70% of the income bracket.
이제 이런 거는 뭐 현찰 나눠주기라고 하는 것은 좀 과한 표현이라는 생각이 들어요. 지금 유류대 인상 또 그로 인해 파생되는 물가 상승이 워낙 크기 때문에 그로 인한 고통을 조금이라도 우리가 보전해 드려야 된다는 생각을 가지고 있습니다.
As the president reiterated that the government's extra budget was organized with surplus tax revenues, the ruling Democratic Party leader Chung Cheong-nae asked for support for its swift approval.
We should not miss this critical point for people's livelihoods. If it gets delayed, the damage will be greater. I have repeatedly promised to pass the extra budget as quickly as possible. I ask for cooperation from the opposition.
But the main opposition People Power Party leader Chang Dong-hyuk disagreed with certain spending plans.
Our party plans to cut unnecessary and inadequate spending. Instead, we have proposed 7 items that are seen as essential for people to survive. I hope these are reflected in the budget. I believe that will be the start of cooperation.
Chang was also critical of the government's policies in a host of areas, ranging from the economy, real estate to foreign policy, and asked that the president change his course of state affairs.
다소 불편한 말씀을 길게 드렸지만 들어주셔서 감사합니다.
전혀 안 불편합니다.
The meeting took place at a time when politicians are standing apart on certain issues, such as a special probe into what the DP calls politically motivated indictments under the previous conservative administration. The three-way meeting was the first of its kind in about 7 months, as a scheduled lunch meeting in February was abruptly cancelled as the PPP leader protested the DP-led judicial reform laws. Yoon Jung-min, Arirang News.
Good morning, I'm Chu Ji-hyun, and this is The World Now. China and Russia on Tuesday vetoed a United Nations Security Council resolution calling on member states to coordinate efforts to protect commercial shipping through the Strait of Hormuz. Moscow and Beijing argued that the measure is unfairly targeting Iran. 11 of the Council's 15 members voted in favor of the resolution put forward by Bahrain. The draft had already been significantly scaled back before the vote, removing any authorization of force and dropping language on binding enforcement. But these concessions still failed to win Chinese and Russian support. The U.S. ambassador to the United Nations condemned the vetoes, saying Iran's closure of the strait was blocking medical aid and supplies from reaching humanitarian crisis in Congo, Sudan, and Gaza. Russia and China said that they were preparing an alternative resolution on Middle East maritime security. Iran's UN ambassador praised the vetoes, calling them the barrier against what he called the misuse of the Security Council to legitimize aggression. A gun battle with Turkish police outside the building housing Israel's consulate in Istanbul has left one attacker dead and 2 others wounded. Turkish authorities said the attackers, 2 of them brothers, arrived by car from the city of Izmit and carried automatic rifles and handguns. The exchange of gunfire on Tuesday lasted at least 10 minutes. 2 police officers sustained minor injuries. No Israeli staff were present at the consulate. Israeli diplomats had withdrawn from Turkey shortly after the Gaza war began in late 2023 amid large protests and a freeze in Turkish-Israeli diplomatic relations. Heavily armed police and armored vehicles have been stationed around the consulate since then. The U.S. Department of Homeland Security on Tuesday raised the possibility of withdrawing customs officials from major international airports in so-called sanctuary cities. This would effectively halt international travel to and from jurisdictions that are not cooperating with the Trump administration's immigration policies. Homeland Security Secretary Markway Mullen said the move was one of several options under consideration as Congress remains deadlocked over DHS funding. But he stressed that no final decision had been made. Airports serving New York, Los Angeles, Chicago, San Francisco, and Seattle are among those that could be affected. The proposal carries potential consequences for U.S. trade, tourism, and the FIFA World Cup scheduled to begin in early June. Artemis II crew began their journey back to Earth on Tuesday after setting a new human spaceflight distance record during their journey around the far side of the moon. In a first for any crewed space mission to the moon, Artemis II made direct radio contact with crew members aboard the International Space Station. Artemis II's crews are targeting a splashdown off the coast of San Diego on Friday, wrapping up a nearly 10-day test flight that will set the stage for Artemis III next year and a crewed lunar landing attempt with Artemis IV in 2028.
Yesterday's evening commute was no joke with winter-like conditions, and it was another chilly start to the day today, but highs will rise higher than yesterday, leading to wide gaps between lows and highs in many places. Then we'll experience wild swings in temperatures this week, chilly mornings, mild afternoons, and some rain in between. Thursday's highs will drop down to 11 degrees, then by Sunday, it will reach up to 24 degrees Celsius here in the capital. And as for this afternoon, Seoul will be getting up to 16 degrees. Daegu, Gyeongju will be getting up to 18 degrees under sunny skies during the day. Then more clouds will be rolling in tonight with rain on the way. From tomorrow morning through Friday, rain will spread nationwide. Heavy rain is expected in southern regions with more than 100 millimeters along with strong winds. Central regions could receive 10 to 50 millimeters of spring rain.
That's all we have for this morning. Arirang News will be back at noon Korea time. Thanks for watching.